Hi, I'm Mietek Boduszyński, and I'm Associate Professor of Politics and International Relations here at Pomona College. I've been studying conflict since the 1990s, and I've also had a chance to work on conflict directly as a former U.S. diplomat posted to places like Kosovo and Libya and Iraq, and also most recently working in the Pentagon on civilian protection, on accountability for war crimes and other related issues. This is Office Hours. The first question is, what exactly is a ceasefire, and what are the key conditions that make a ceasefire likely to hold rather than collapse? So a ceasefire is an agreement between two or more parties to stop fighting. Why are some ceasefires more successful than others? That's a very complicated answer, and it's really idiosyncratic. The short answer is it depends. But let me just say a couple of things that I think determine its success based on the research. One is clear terms, and terms that are clearly verifiable. The second are that the costs of leaving that ceasefire, of defecting, of saying, I'm not going to abide by this ceasefire anymore, are higher than the costs of staying in. Another one is external guarantees and monitoring. So some sort of outside powerful actor, whether that's a state or the United Nations, steps in and says, we're going to make sure that this works, and we're going to monitor to make sure that both sides are abiding by the conditions. And the final one is inclusivity, meaning that all the parties to the conflict and beyond even the military parts or the militias that are participating, ordinary citizens and civil society are part of that. Often inclusivity also means granting some sort of amnesties to people who were involved in the conflict and maybe even involved in abuses. So the second question is, does a ceasefire mean the conflict is over? And the short answer is no, not at all. Often ceasefire agreements don't address the deeper roots of the conflict. Using a very recent example, the ceasefire that the U.S. helped to mediate between Israel and Hamas doesn't necessarily address the aspiration of many Palestinians to have their own state. And so long as that aspiration is unfulfilled, some would argue that conflict will continue and violent conflict could reignite. And the next question is, what typically prevents wars from ending even when both sides seem exhausted? Well, the incentives have to be in place. I already mentioned that for ceasefires, and that's true for any kind of settlement to end the war. But lingering distrust, and that distrust might be that the other side will use the period of the ceasefire to rearm or to undermine it in some way. So trust is important, but as someone once said, trust but verify. Here I have some challenge coins from my career in government. NATO, for instance, was an important organization in the Balkans that carried out exactly that task: trust, verification, security guarantees. Spoilers can step in, both internal and external spoilers, to undermine a ceasefire or other kind of peace agreement. And I would say those are the two big ones. The next question is, in addition to a ceasefire, what are some ways that peace can be guaranteed in the longer term? And here I wanted to point out one more challenge coin I have in my prop here. This one comes from the Office of Global Criminal Justice, which used to be part of the State Department, unfortunately no longer eliminated under the second Trump administration. But one of the things that this office worked on, and I had a chance to work with it in my most recent time in government at the Pentagon, is on accountability. So ensuring that perpetrators of the worst abuses in a conflict or under an autocratic government are held to account, whether that's through domestic trials or international trials. And that kind of accountability, many people who study conflicts would say, is really important to ensuring long-term peace, because it helps ensure the rule of law. It helps with the goal of reconciliation. It helps victims understand who perpetrated the abuses against them. And the next question is, what responsibilities do powerful nations have to intervene or not in other countries' conflicts? I would say that outside actors have interests in intervening, not so much responsibility. But I would qualify that by saying that we do have a doctrine or a principle passed by the majority of UN members in 2005 called Responsibility to Protect, or R2P for short. And this is not legally binding, but it's a norm by which states came together in the UN system and said, yes, sovereignty is sacred, but it's not so sacred if a state commits certain kinds of abuses against its own people. And in that kind of a case, intervention is justified. And so we've seen humanitarian interventions in conflicts in places such as Bosnia and Herzegovina or Kosovo or Libya in 2011, but we've also seen a lot of failure to intervene when civilians were being killed in large numbers. And so, Sudan, for instance, today is such an example. So it's highly imperfect, and I would say that most states in the world act first and foremost according to their own interest, and so if there's no compelling security or economic interest to intervene, even in the face of horrible abuse, then they won't intervene. Or sometimes they'll intervene in a way that worsens rather than lessens the conflict. The next question is, how do negotiators deal with groups that aren't recognized as legitimate governments? In fact, negotiators have to do that all the time, particularly in the post-Cold War era, where many wars have been conflicts between non-state groups. So you can think of a group like the Taliban, which now governs Afghanistan, but was an insurgency group until 2021 and the U.S. withdrawal. The United States, in fact, under the first Trump administration, decided to negotiate directly with the Taliban, which was controversial for many. But sometimes negotiating with such groups means using various kinds of intermediaries, third parties, United Nations, sometimes using a country's intelligence apparatus. There's various ways to do that.